on? Mr. Dave here in my garage / studio here up in Alpine, and I just wanted to talk to you guys about how to learn how to make fake rocks the easiest way possible. Now, some of you guys may remember in some of my other videos and conversations that I have been in my career a sand sculptor. So for many years, decades really, I was carving all kinds of things all over the world. One of the easiest things to carve was rocks. Again, this is just some sand that I use for my convention theme party boxes, I'd call it. This is like half a bucket. And so if you want to learn how to make fake rocks, I would suggest get some sand. You want some fill sand. It's better than the sandbox sand you get at Home Depot that's been heavily washed. This stuff holds together better. And so what you want to do is you want to get sand that can hold its shape a little bit when it gets wet and stuff. But with sand, you can practice making rocks so fast, so easy, it's crazy. You can just pack it up, and depending on what kind of rocks you want to make, you can make them any way that you prefer. I'm kind of trying to do this backwards from the side you guys are looking at, but really one of the easiest things to do when I'm doing sand sculptures was making fake rocks, or at least emulating rocks. You can just pop the sand with your trowel and do little undercuts if you want. Very simple. You can put in some striations, some fault lines. And it very quickly begins to give you the sense that you have a rock sitting here. You can poke it around. And again, this is more angular of a rock. Super fast, super easy. You can come back with the brush, kind of dab it a little bit. That softens your edges. You can brush it and use this to just sort of brush it around, and that softens things, creates some little textures and that kind of thing. So very quickly you can see how fast it is that you can get a rock look. And you're trying to learn how to do this, right? That's the whole point of this whole thing. Sand is the fastest method to learn how to carve things in 3 dimensions. There's just nothing faster or as effective and as easy as that. So it really is as simple as that. You can do the peel-aways, onion peel-aways, and just keep doing whatever it is you want to do for your fake rock look. Now I'm doing it backwards just so you guys can kind of see from that side what I'm doing. But again, with sand, you can just do it so fast it's ridiculous. It's super crazy. Little brushes, little brushing, soften those edges again if you want them soft. If you don't want them soft, you want them more roundy, you can do that too. So if you want to make a rock that has more symmetry to it, or is more roundy, just pack the sand in there, get it up into a shape or a pile, whatever you want to do. Just dab it in there. Sand is the easiest, fastest way to learn how to make rocks that look like rocks. Essentially, this is the same thing as you're going to be making it in without the Portland cement, the binder that makes your rocks hold their shape. So this is a little more roundy kind of a shape. Again, the texture and the depth and degree of details you want to do, whatever you want to do, you can do. Give the little dabble do you with the brushing. This takes a little bit of the material off. Kind of working on the back here, which is kind of dumb because you guys can't see it unless I had a second camera here. Maybe I'll get more high tech and have another camera here for you. But you get the idea. So I recommend using sand to practice making your fake rock. All right, what's going on out there? This is Mr. Dave here up at the studio here in Alpine, and this is practicing your fake rock with sand. Sand is the easiest thing you can use to go ahead and get a feel for how to shape out your rocks and stuff. We see a lot of boxy, marshmallowy looking, lumpy, bumpy rocks out there, and you know, you'll find that kind of thing in nature, but you really want to look at nature and see what nature is giving us as a guide, because we're trying to emulate the natural thing. So I've got a couple buckets of sand here. This is sand that I used when I was doing sand sculptures for conventions and theme parties. I'd bring in a big table in a box and I'd pack this up and we'd make castles or what have you out of it. And so this is like 3 or 4 buckets that we have stacked up. It's a mixture of sort of a beachy type of sand, so the grains are really small, but it does get a little bit harder when it dries out. This is a piece that's starting to dry out, and you can see it's kind of pops when you hold it. It pops apart. But what we want to do is make sure we're making our rocks look natural. A lot of times you'll see rocks that they're symmetrical, and what you want to do when you're making your rocks is make them look like the natural environment, like the real thing. You'll see things in some of the remodels I'll do. I'm kind of going all over San Diego County, and there's rocks that are amazingly, I'm trying to be gracious here in the terminology, but we have to fight our urge to make things symmetrical. You can kind of see how a rock that has an exact sort of rotational shape going on it's too symmetrical, right? And then I'll see cracks sometimes. Let's go ahead and make a plumber's butt that just come down, and they're like equal size on both sides of the crack. I'll smooth it out. Will you find this in nature? Yeah, you'll find this in nature on occasion. But most of the time there's a asymmetry to rocks, not a symmetry. There's a balance to rocks in nature. It's an interesting kind of a contradiction. There's asymmetry in nature, but there's also a symmetry, or I just would prefer to call it sort of a balance. So there's our Mr. Plumber's butt rock right there. You'll also see rock cracks that start to emulate like fish scales. I've seen that quite a bit. And there's also a tendency to want to keep cracking, keep making cracks. We got to make more cracks. Let's keep cracking. Well, I like cracks. Cracks are rocks. They look like rocks. Okay, let's just keep making cracks everywhere. Well, after a while, you start to develop patterns. So we want to try to avoid doing that. So we've got ourselves some rocky kind of activity looking here. Get our brush going on. That softens it up. You can kind of disguise the symmetry and the goofiness of it a little bit with the brush. So interesting. I don't know who came up with the idea, but just having a brush to run over your mortar mix, I guess, would be the final texture material that you're using generally. I have carved shotcrete to make a rock kind of an item. There's a retaining wall, and so you can kind of do that. The way our arms work, they tend to want to rotate and make a curve. So very common, I see cracks that just have this rotation, this curve going on, and you want to be careful that the human instinct to want to make things symmetrical, like i.e. the same, you have to resist that a little bit. It's also nice to try and get more depth to your cracks. So we're kind of bouncing around on subject matter here, but you want to make sure that your cracks look like rock cracks, all right? So this is, you know, since I've been making rocks for so long and made so many, it's hard for me to do them wrong a little bit. I'm still digging it out and changing it and making it try and look less goofy and, you know, Fred Flintstone land and kind of strange. So I don't know what this could be, but you can make anything with sand, and that means you can make anything with the mortar. That's why you have these artists out there doing a lot of things that look like wood with the wood grain and that sort of thing. But you want to make sure that you avoid the absolute balancing and symmetry. For example, this is like bisected right down the middle pretty much. If you're going to do something and you're starting to think about the composition of your overall piece, it might be better to have a predominant stone on one side and again, we're just practicing with sand, so there's no hardener. But the sand that if you can get some sand that's from a sand contractor supplier, you want to get fill sand, F-I-L-L, fill sand, and that's going to give you some better holding power, if you will. You want it wet, but not totally dripping. Get some angles going in there, and it's really not very hard to just get in there with your trowels. They tend to make little angles anyway. But then have a smaller composition of material, of items over here. So there's a larger rock, maybe a little tiny one on the bottom here. You want to have negative spaces between your stones. This is, again, composition we're talking about now in terms of how to put rocks together, the groupings. So this is just the bulk shapes we have right now, right? Big one, medium, small. You want to start getting into the peel-aways, you can get that going, just like an onion. You can carry on that same kind of crack activity. It's the same kind of rock if you're, you know, working on a project and you're making it all out of the same style of stone, then the cracks, if you will, are going to be the same on the other ones in your composition as well. Rocks, as I've spoken on the other video, are the easiest thing to make when we're doing a sand sculpture. They go pretty fast. They look pretty cool. You want, again, those negative spaces. That's really helpful. You can accentuate those in when you're doing your painting too, and your staining. Keep your brushing a little lighter if you want to keep those edges sharp. And with good sand, you can undercut it and do some pretty cool stuff. Again, the same thing you're going to be doing when you have your final texture coat on there and you're trying to get your rocks to look like the real deal. This stuff popped off and peeled away and broke off. And if you pack your sand tight, it'll even break off even more realistically. So we've got a big mass here, got a little one over here, get that negative space going on in there. So we're talking how to practice making your fake rocks, and you're just using sand, and it's amazing how effective the sand is at giving you that look. Fingers can give ourselves some negative spaces. You can use the butt end of your trowel to do stuff. Rocks are irregular oftentimes, and so having stuff that's all kind of broken and weird is not a bad thing necessarily. So we can see again, we went from the asymmetry of the butt, bigger element here, medium and small. With Shakin' Mr. Dave here, we're going to do a little more practicing with sand about how to make our fake rocks. And these are some of the tools we always use when we're doing our thing. We use these actually when we're doing sand sculptures as well. Some of these started off square, and over the years they actually wore down from doing so much work with our sand projects. But when I start off with more of a sidelong horizontal feature, a wall, if you will, of sand. And sand works really good again for practicing what we're trying to do. It packs well. You want to get sand again that's a fill sand, F-I-L-L sand, and you can get that at a local sand contracting supplies business that provides fill sand for backfilling holes and stuff when you're doing trenching and that sort of thing. And these same tools, again, we're using the same tools we'd be using doing our mortar mix carving, our rock carving and stuff anyway. So wanted to get a little, if I could, a little more vertical wall here to just take and play around with things. When it's more vertical, that means you can cut and carve things in a way because you have gravity on your side pulling things down. I used a board on the back to help pack this, and so that gave us a little more verticality. You can actually put boxes together, and we call them forms when you're doing the sand work, and really stomp the heck out of it. We even use gas-powered whacker compactors to really jam the sand together to give it a very strong, dense consistency, and that allowed us to do amazing sand projects, sand sculptures, and you can see that in the sand sculpting videos and still photos that you see now online. That's the key, getting sand that gets a little harder when it dries out, and using that as your media to carve. So here you can see we've just smoothed this out. You can already see it has sort of a rock shape to it, just naturally all by itself. With the trowels, you get angles and shapes and corners. You can see just by my packing it, we're creating various angles and shapes to it. You can then round things out or keep a very strong line on your rock that you're carving out of the mortar mix again. And mortar has a while to go before it goes off, and that's great because that gives you a chance to do things with it as it changes its viscosity, if you will. You can adjust and make improvements even after you're done with your rock and it goes off. You can come back and actually cut into it with diamond blades and still modify it and come back and add more sand to it as well. So here we have sort of this nice big shape. You can then come back and carve in some angles, and you can do the peel-aways that come in, and you're just letting the sand fall away from the surface that you're putting in these onion peel-aways to. Then you can change the angle of your trowel and get into more of a fracture, or a fault line crack, I'd like to call them. You can start off with your peel away and then come back and add additional, more of a fault line, increase the depth of your crack going forward. Now when you step back a little bit and look at this, you can see how there's a confluence of activity here in terms of the cracking and stuff. A lot of times we see fake rock that has so many cracks in it, they're just going everywhere. So there's cracks here, and there's just everywhere. Now is that bad? Not necessarily, but sometimes you can just keep going. Why? Because cracks are cool. Oh, let's just keep cracking it. Okay, let's add more cracks. Let's just crack up. Everywhere cracks going on, and before you know it, you don't have negative spaces, or spaces that don't have this detail going on. I've seen some faux rock work that just has so many fault lines, it looks like the rock's getting ready just to collapse, because there's so many places on the rock that have lines in them. You have rocks that have actual lines that come across, and they seem to have a fault line, as it were. The whole rock looks like it's ready to split and break apart. And again, you want to study the real thing. You want to find out what the real thing has going on. You want to avoid sometimes having a spoke, a place where the cracks all come together and meet in a central location. For some reason, it just seems to me that doesn't always look as natural. And again, you'll probably find something like that in nature, but generally speaking, cracks have a way of not ending up coming out of a central hub type of a deal. All right, so as you step back, we see this rock has got cracks going everywhere. All right, so you want to make sure you don't go too crazy. Sometimes it's good to have areas that don't have huge amounts of cracks going on, but have maybe 2 or 3 dominant cracks. So we see here in this again, this is what's so cool about sand, you guys. You can just practice and just burn right through different concepts of how you want to crack your rocks. How do you want to break up these spaces? You want to keep them very similar, are very asymmetrical, so you've got areas that don't have a lot of detail and busy stuff going on. It's nice to have those separate places. They help complement each other. If we have too much stuff going on, it ends up kind of getting busy. And again, everybody who's an artist has their own thoughts and preferences and ideas about what is quote-unquote right or correct or better or worse. And you can see that in the various styles that are out there. My goal is always tried to be that I don't have a style, but I do, and kind of everybody sort of does. But you want to get to where your style is such that your rocks don't sort of give the viewer an indication as to who made it. So now we see big spaces with smoother areas, and the detail is all sort of congregating over here a little bit more. And I talked about in the other video making scallop curves. There's just something about the human arm and how it rotates when we're carving things. You can end up making these sort of odd, again, they look kind of like fish scales, so you want to resist that a little bit. Again, the peel-aways or the onions are kind of fun to do, and if you have a a steep face, it's much easier to do. Again, this is just sand, but you can end up with a great opportunity to do the peel-aways when the mortar mix is starting to go off. So that's another cool thing. And the one last thing I wanted to talk about was when you're doing a vertical or more vertical surface, and you want to start adding in a stone look. I see a lot of times sort of this strange pattern that's going on, and you want to try to, it's either the stone was milled and chiseled and made before it came to your site. Again, if you're building a real wall out of blocks and stones, and this is sort of a brick type of pattern. And of course, if the brick has exposed top, then you're going to have these little mortar joints up here as well, and you see those going on as well. So if we just keep it simple and leave it right about where it's at, do minimal brush work, not too crazy, you know, it looks all right. But it's you can start to see, like, this is tapering downhill. You can see that there was a clear, obvious effort to make this horizontal line, and it sort of sweeps a little. And then we're adding in our verticals. It's good to look at actual walls that were made with actual individual stones one at a time, to try to make sure you're, again, mimicking what you want your rock work to be. Again, is this a built stone structure with individual stones that were made, you know, chiseled near the site or far away and brought in, and then installed a piece at a time? You know, if so, then you want to try and make it so they look different. There's a variation. You see some of these guys, you guys out there, some of you guys do a lot of this stuff, and it really is cool. The plane we have here is all made prior to these lines being made, so it might be a good idea to undercut a little bit to get this stone to look like it's set, and this one's popping out a little bit. And you can use all different kinds of tools that you can use. I always liked to use the least amount of tools to get what I needed done.